Arctic frost is Joe Biden's Watergate. Merrick Garland was a fundamentally corrupt attorney general. Jack Smith was a fundamentally corrupt prosecutor. This was a political enemies list from the beginning.
Listen, what you're about to hear should concern every single American who still believes in freedom. Because what Ted Cruz just exposed is not normal politics. This is something much bigger. Some are calling it asterisk Arctic frost. Asterisk. Cruz calls it something else. Joe Biden's Watergate. And honestly, after hearing this, it's hard to ignore.
Arctic frost is Joe Biden's Watergate. Merrick Garland was a fundamentally corrupt attorney general. Jack Smith was a fundamentally corrupt prosecutor. This was a political enemies list from the beginning. 197 subpoenas for 430 Republican entities and individuals. That is an absolute and egregious abuse of power. The Biden Justice Department signed off on issuing subpoenas for the phone records of at least 9 U.S. senators. 20% of the Republicans in the United States Senate were the target of this fishing expedition. They did so in complete contravention of the Constitution, of separation of powers, of the speech and debate clause, of free speech, of basic rights of privacy. This is an executive who believes it is justified spying on their opponents in the legislature because they convince themselves the ends justify the means. I want to talk to you about one of those subpoenas. One of those subpoenas went from Jack Smith to AT&T, seeking my cell phone communications. It went to AT&T, and I actually want to commend AT&T for doing the right thing. AT&T is based in Texas. AT&T looked at that subpoena, and they went to their legal counsel. And they said, what should we do with that subpoena? And their legal counsel said, you cannot comply because this is protected by the speech and debate clause of the U.S. Constitution. And so AT&T declined to comply, did not hand over my cell phone records. Now, one might ask, ordinarily, a phone company being asked to hand over the phone records of a sitting senator would notify that senator. Well, there was a reason AT&T did not do so. Accompanying the subpoena was an order, which I have in my hand right here, an order that was signed by Judge James E. Boasberg. Now, who is Boasberg? Boasberg is that radical leftist judge who is out of control, who has been issuing nationwide injunctions, one after the other, trying to stop President Trump from carrying out his mandate from the voters. Judge Boasberg issued an order to AT&T and signed that order, prohibiting AT&T from informing me of this subpoena for at least 1 year. And Judge Boasberg gave the basis for that order, and I'm going to quote from the order Judge Boasberg signed. The court finds reasonable grounds to believe that such disclosure will result in destruction of or tampering with evidence, intimidation of potential witnesses, and serious jeopardy to the investigation. That's an order a judge signed. Now, I can tell you right now, there is precisely zero evidence to conclude that I am likely to destroy or tamper with evidence or to intimidate potential witnesses. Zero evidentiary basis for that. This order is an abuse of power. This order is a weaponized legal system. My assumption, we don't have the subpoenas that were issued for the other senators, but my assumption is Judge Boasberg printed these things out like the placemats at Denny's, one after the other. We don't know that for a fact, but I feel confident that he concluded it's likely that Lindsey Graham would destroy evidence, and Marsha Blackburn would destroy evidence, and Eric Schmidt would destroy evidence, and Chuck Grassley would destroy evidence. If a litigant makes a claim for which there is no factual basis, that litigant is subject to sanctions in federal court. And if a judge signs an order reaching a factual conclusion for which there is zero evidence whatsoever, that judge is abusing his power. I am right now calling on the House of Representatives to impeach Judge Boasberg. Judge Boasberg put his robe down, stood up, and said, "Sign me up to be part of the partisan vendetta against 20% of the Republicans in the Senate." That is a dereliction of duty and a violation of the judicial oath. And I want to thank Chairman Grassley and Chairman Johnson for pursuing this tenaciously like a dog on a bone. We are going to get the answers of every person who signed off on this abuse of power, and mark my words, there will be accountability for these zealots who wanted to corrupt the Department of Justice and corrupt the judiciary in order to try to attack their enemies list. That is unconstitutional, it is immoral, and it is wrong. Senator Kennedy.
Now, I just watched this clip, and I'm going to break it down for you. Not as some neutral talking head, but as someone who believes in the Constitution, limited government, and accountability. Because what Cruz is alleging here, if even partially true, is deeply troubling. So here's the heart of it. Cruz is accusing the Biden Justice Department, led by Merrick Garland and Special Counsel Jack Smith, of running what he calls a political targeting operation ****. We're not talking about a couple subpoenas. We're talking about 197 subpoenas for 30-plus Republican individuals and entities. That's not small. That's sweeping. And the question every American should ask is simple. Was this about justice or power? Now here's where it gets even more serious. Cruz claims that the DOJ went after phone records of at least 9 U.S. senators. Let that sink in. That's 20% of Republican senators. If true, that's not just aggressive law enforcement. That raises real concerns about separation of powers. Because in America, the executive branch is not supposed to spy on the legislative branch. That's not how a constitutional republic works. That's the kind of thing we criticize in other countries. Then Cruz makes it personal. He says his own phone records were subpoenaed from AT&T. And surprisingly, AT&T refused. Why? Because their legal team said it was protected under the speech and debate clause of the Constitution. Now, whether you like Cruz or not, that clause exists for a reason. To protect lawmakers from political intimidation. But here's the part that really raises eyebrows. Cruz says there was a gag order signed by Judge James E. Boasberg. That order allegedly prevented AT&T from notifying him. Lasted an entire year. Claimed he might destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. Now Cruz flat out rejects that. And look, you don't have to agree with him politically to ask, what evidence justified that level of secrecy? Because secrecy in government should be the exception, not the rule. This is where the conversation gets bigger than Cruz, bigger than Biden, bigger than party politics. It's about something many Americans are increasingly worried about. Is the justice system being weaponized? Cruz clearly believes the answer is yes. He calls it an enemies list, a fishing expedition, a violation of constitutional rights. Now, critics will say, this is just political rhetoric, and that's fair to consider. But here's the problem. When trust in institutions collapses, everybody loses. Cruz compares this to Watergate. Now that's a big claim. Watergate was about government abuse of power, surveillance, and targeting political opponents. So the real question is, are we seeing echoes of that today, or is this being exaggerated? That's something Americans need to look into for themselves. Cruz doesn't hold back. He calls for Judge Boasberg to be impeached. That's serious. Impeachment isn't about disagreement. It's about abuse of office. So again, it comes down to evidence. If there's proof of wrongdoing, there must be accountability. If not, then these claims should be challenged. That's how a functioning system works. Here's where I stand. I believe in the Constitution, checks and balances, equal justice under the law. And I'll say this clearly. No administration, Republican or Democrat, should ever use the justice system to target political opponents. If that line gets crossed, even once, it sets a dangerous precedent. Because next time, it could be used against anyone. Left, right, doesn't matter. This isn't just about politicians. This is about privacy rights, government overreach, trust in institutions. If Americans start believing the system is rigged, that's when things really start to break down. So here's the bottom line. Ted Cruz has made very serious allegations. Now it's up to Congress, the courts, and the American people to demand transparency and truth. Because in a free country, power must always be questioned. Authority must always be accountable. And justice must never be political. If you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in holding power accountable, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. Do you think this is a real scandal or political exaggeration? Let's talk about it.